I have the special honor and the fortune to once again host Dr. Luis Javier Pentón Herrera to the podcast. And this time we're going to continue our SLIFE theme and having him talk about his book. Well, Dr. Herrera, Pentón Herrera, welcome back to the podcast.
Tan, thank you so much for your invitation again and for the opportunity to continue talking to you. Thank you.
The last time we talked, you shared a really touching story about a student who didn't come back to school. Would you tell us a different story of working with students that has really impacted your experience?
Absolutely, Tan. Thank you for that question. And let me share with you, I have another emotional story for you this time. I guess my entire teaching career is just emotional stories, but this one, it's very close to my heart because it goes back to actually before I was a teacher, just me growing up in my family and my interest in and motivation behind this topic of students with limited or interrupted formal education or literacy. In fact, like formal schooling, literacy, all of these topics, they go back to my family. My paternal grandmother and my dad are both individuals who I guess you consider like students with interrupted schooling or with very limited schooling. My grandmother never attended formal school in her life, and my father, he completed a up to third grade, what is considered third grade education, and then that's it. He didn't continue his schooling. So thankfully they were both present, especially my grandmother were very present in my life during my developmental years. And I do remember, I do have this particular memory. We were at the kitchen table in my living room in my mom's house, and then as an elementary child, when you're learning to read, to write, you like to share those things with your family, like, oh look, I can read this, oh look. And then my grandmother just happened to be there that day, and I was writing, I think it was like a paragraph or something. It was very, a big event in my learning life. And then I shared that with my grandmother, and I'm like, look, I wrote this. Can you see it? Because I was doing homework. And then, can you read it? Can you tell me if it's okay? And then she told me I cannot read, and that confused me. Imagine, an elementary age student person. I just thought in my head, wow, everybody can read and write, especially adults. They should be able to read and write. And I was just confused. I still remember this vividly. I remember this feeling. And I just kind of in disbelief, I think I started laughing out loud and telling my grandmother, this is not possible. What do you mean you cannot read? And it's interesting. She took that opportunity to educate me. She told me, don't laugh at people like me, don't laugh at me, just instead teach me. And that really stayed with me, and I dedicated this book, actually this life book, to my grandmother, to my dad, and it has been my passion since I was little, and I hope to, this is only the beginning. I really hope to continue this line of work as soon as I get a little bit less busy. I'm just always busy for some reason, but doing other projects. But I really want to continue this line of research and work. It's a very passionate topic close to my heart. Yeah.
Well, your grandmother is looking down on you. Your abuela is looking down on you, and she is so proud of you right now, I'm sure, because from a single paragraph to now writing books, and in the future will continue to write books that continue to teach others. I guess um, she wished that he said, "Don't laugh at me, come teach me," right? And now you're using that as a way to teach us all how to work with students or people like your grandmother or like my mother, who is also, or my sister, who's also a SLIFE. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Sam, for those kind words. And let me share with you that growing up and still thinking, that has guided a lot of my teaching, my thinking about formal schooling. That when people say, oh, you have an education, or you went to school, I don't necessarily see intelligence related to formal schooling. And I always tell my mom completed a 12th grade. So, she's what we consider educated person, a person who completed her schooling. But I do tell my mom all the time, you have a PhD in life, because you're one of the most, you know, wise individuals that I know in my life, so much wisdom. And my grandmother was the same. Of course, she did have some difficulties with print, reading, writing. My mom would always accompany her to events where she had to sign or read, or she needed support with print. But beyond that, my grandmother also, who never attended school, she was wise, just a wise person. And I think that has definitely shaped my perspective of schooling and how I look at students with interrupted and limited education, that just because they didn't go to school for whatever reason, that doesn't make them any more intelligent, any more capable of success, of learning, of being able to interact in the classroom. And that's something that has definitely shaped the way I think about all students.
That was such a quotable moment right there. You said intelligence is formal schooling is not a sign of intelligence, right? And I think it's just a sign of opportunities, right? And you
Yes.
said your mom has a PhD and your grandmother has a PhD in life, and that goes back
And
to the concept of asset-based instruction, where we see SLIFE kids as not like, oh, pobrecito, look at what the things that have happened to you that has caused you to have limited or interrupted education. Now we say, oh my goodness, look at all the life experiences that you've had that I have never had. And you survived wars, you survived natural disasters that I, as a privileged person, never really had to experience. Right? Let's talk about the seed for this book.
well, I started working. It was kind of like an epiphany moment for me. It was when I was pursuing my doctoral degree. My first, let me tell you, so my first proposal, my first proposal for my dissertation got revised and then got rejected, and it was not approved, the first proposal. And it was going to talk about literacy campaigns. I don't know if you're familiar with the term, but in essence is they call it literacy campaigns, are events or programs that especially developing countries use to promote print literacy and to teach print literacy. And it's Cuba had a very popular literacy campaign in 1959, for example, which that's what they promoted there. And but you can find it everywhere throughout the world. And I wanted to do that, but in the United States, we really don't have literacy campaigns, so that was not a thing for my university. So they said, no, this is not going to work for us. So I went with my second topic, and then I was kind of like breaking my head. I was like, what am I going to focus on? Because I already knew that I wanted to do this work with SLIFE students, and I didn't know the acronym SLIFE at that time. I just knew students who didn't have that opportunity to go to school, or they didn't develop print literacy yet. So at that time, I was also welcoming students, Mayan students, Mam, Quechua, Ichil, and different communities of Mayan students. And many of them had interrupted or limited formal schooling. And it just happened that I was learning about them because I didn't know about indigenous students. And then realizing that many of them also had interrupted schooling, it was just an epiphany. I was like, okay, this is the topic that I need to focus on in my dissertation. And I do think that when a door closes, a window opens. And when they said no to rejection my first time, it was just meant to be. I needed to focus on this population of indigenous students, which I love, I'm very passionate about. But then also I get to combine my second passion, my other passion, that is SLIFE. And that was just what I needed to do in my dissertation. And it really tells a story that I did have to wait for my second proposal, and I had to wait longer than I wanted to. But eventually, I think I'm very proud of the work that I did in my dissertation, and it got an award from the American Literacy Educators Research Association, ALER Association. And it's just everything happened at the right time. It had to be that way.
I wrote that exact phrase down. I said, door closed, window opened. Right. And so
Yes,
you were just
always.
right. And it's the right door that closed because it was the right open that it was the right window that needed to be open. That's a
Yes.
really touching story. Can you tell us about
Thank
part one of your book? How can we frame the conversation around SLIFE students?
Yes, absolutely, Tan. So, as you know, the first part of the book, of this book, it has one chapter, and this is something that in the initial proposal of the book, I knew that I wanted to talk about how to frame the conversation, because in the field, we're talking a lot about deficit mindset and what words to use, what words not to use. In this acronym, we do have the word limited, which many times might be seen as deficit, but it is the acronym that we have right now. It's the umbrella that we're using, and all the research is going under this umbrella. And I was very grateful. One of the reviewers actually, when we sent the proposal when I sent the proposal for the book, the reviewer said, I think you need to frame this conversation. And I was like, that's exactly what I wanted to do. So I had the idea in mind, and I reached out to two wonderful co-authors, Christopher Browder and Jose Franco. And I already knew what I wanted to write. I had the opportunity to talk to Christopher, and I told him, look, this is what I want in the chapter. I need you to help me write it, because it has a quantitative mindset. I'm very, very qualitative storytelling, and and he's very numbers person. So it's just perfect support. And then Jose Franco brought this very new idea of what interrupted looks like. When we think about interrupted schooling, we usually think students who do not know how to read and write. But in his particular context of Venezuela, he talks about interrupted schooling as refugees having to stop their school because of political reasons. And those are university students, so they know how to read and write, but they have to interrupt their schooling to go and migrate. And they both graciously accepted my invitation, and then we started writing. I think it really took less than a month to finish this chapter, because we already knew what we wanted. It was just a matter of starting to write the chapter. But in our message, really, for this conversation about SLIFE and around the topic of SLIFE, we framed it from an asset-based perspective, humanistic perspective. And then that means that we talked about the label of SLIFE to go beyond the label and think of students as human beings. When we think of SLIFE, first, and this is something that Christopher made a very great point in the chapter, he talks about how when we think of SLIFE, the way that is operationalized, that's a quantitative term, by the way, the way that we use it, he's very number person. The way that he used, or that we use the term SLIFE, it's really, it's not conclusive. You may have a person who is considered SLIFE because they have 6 months of interrupted schooling, or you might have a SLIFE student who had never attended formal school. So we really don't know what SLIFE really is. The criterion is very, very wide, very, very open. So don't think of SLIFE students as all being the same. Learn from them, learn from their experiences, talk to them. Also, when we think about SLIFE students, do they speak indigenous languages or minority languages within their countries? That's usually one of the reasons why they do not have access to formal education. So again, learning about their stories, not putting them in a box, because that doesn't work very well, especially for SLIFE. Also, we talked about SLIFE in this particular framing the conversation. We hopefully push the field, and we're stating, we're encouraging policymakers and administrators to think about, why are we using this label? So when we use, just to give you an example, when we use labels like IEP or special education, usually English learners, usually those labels have advantages, economic advantages, budget support. So ELs, they have budget support for the EL program. But then SLIFE, if you're assign them a label, just to assign it, and you don't have any budget, any support, and economic support to help them, what are you doing then? You're stigmatizing them without any support. And so in this chapter, we don't have answers. We just have a lot of, inquietudes or concerns that we're just pushing forward in the field. And, the use of labels, why are we using it? Do we need to use it? What can we do? Can we, for example, put SLIFE within IEPs or specific considerations that students bring with them that would give them budget and, for the school, the teachers to support those print literacy needs? Or what can we do with SLIFE? So there is a lot in there. Dr. Andrea Di Capua, she was very gracious. She's wonderful, and she graciously accepted to review this chapter. We had the chapters were peer reviewed, so amongst ourselves, and then after the Springer, the reviewers also review them. But before I send out the final manuscript, she graciously reviewed this chapter, and she said, "Luis, these are many of the things that I've struggled with myself as well, with the topic of SLIFE, the acronym, the label. So I think we're right on the money with this particular chapter, and I hope." Really, the purpose is to frame it as a humanist, asset-based conversation, but also to cause some tensions there, so the field can continue to move forward. What are we doing for SLIFE?
Yeah, labels are always problematic, and I bet that in 5, at least 10 years, this acronym will probably change to to change the idea of what limited and interrupted really means. So.
Yes, absolutely. And that's actually something that I actually talk about in chapter 2. And there's just so many terminologies, terms, labels that are used throughout. You have, for example, if you're focusing on adolescent and adults, you have LESLA, which is an organization that focuses specifically on that student population. They don't use LIFE, they use LESLA term, which I'm trying to remember now what it stands for, but it's something like second language learners for adults, something like that. And then you also have, like in Australia, you have disrupted schooling. You also have students with interrupted formal education, which is Dr. Custodio and Ms. Judy O'Laughlin. They use the SIFE acronym. So, I mean, you have so many things. That's also one of the things that we talked about in that chapter 1 with Christopher and Jose. If we start using too many different acronyms, this is a fairly new field of study. So there's only really, when you think about how many people research or work with, publish about SLIFE population, it's only a few of us, that we know. And so if each of us starts using different acronyms, that's not going to help the research become one field. It's just going to be spread throughout. So that's another concern that we had in that chapter. But again, we don't have an answer. We're just throwing it out there for the field to explore.
Well, when I saw that chapter, you were talking about research in the US, Canada, Australia, and the UK. I was so excited because we have most of our listeners on the podcast come from the US, but the second most come from Canada, and then there are our Aussie listeners, and then there are also our British listeners. So it's great that you actually touched on that, because we know that SLIFE students, or SLIFE, they don't go just to America. They're all around the world. I'm thinking about the recent Afghani refugees. They're now all over the world.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and those 4 countries, Dan, are actually the way that that's chapter 2, which focuses on K through 12 students in those 4 countries, and chapter 3, it's kind of like the sister chapter that focuses on adults in those 4 countries. And the way that we and Jamie wrote chapter 3, the way that we talked about these 2 chapters, sister chapters, is that we wanted to focus on the most the countries that receive the most refugees, and because the book focuses on English specifically, so the 4 countries that English-speaking countries that welcome the most refugees with this population, and those were the 4 countries that were identified.
Let's move to chapter 4 then. Can you tell us about why and how and where to advocate for SLIFE?
Yes, absolutely. So chapter 4, I reached out to Dr. Heather Linville, wonderful person, wonderful collaborator. And she's a big name in advocacy for English learners, as we know. And of course, I had to welcome her to this and invite her to this book. And we agreed that, in our conversation, our initial conversations, we agreed that just welcoming SLIFE and saying, okay, welcome to our school, that's not enough. We need to advocate for inclusion, for high quality education, specifically their needs, which is print literacy. If in schools, the way it is right now in the US, in Canada, Australia, the UK. If you do not know how to read and write in schools, sadly, you're not going to succeed. It's just the way that formal schooling is set up right now. So what we talked about here is that we propose a very easy 5-step advocacy process that teachers can use for SLIFE. And we actually used her, she recently published an article in TISO Journal, very practitioner focused, very easy to read, on this 5-step process of advocacy for teachers. But then we kind of took it and then we changed it or tweaked it specifically for the context of SLIFE. And then we use that 5-step process. We shared 3 real life examples of how teachers can advocate for SLIFE. And those 3 real life examples actually happened to us. So she wrote the second one, I wrote the first and the third example. And using this 5-step process, this was the issue, and then this is what we did following those 5 steps. Very practitioner oriented. I did want this book to be very, yes, of course, it has a lot of research, it's research based, but I'm talking to teachers, to practitioners. So I want them to understand, look, this is all the research, but this is how you can do it. Because many times I find, Tan, that a lot of the books are very interesting, but then as a teacher, how can I use this in my classroom? I need to see a practice, practical application. So that's what I wanted. Each chapter has practical applications for teachers, all of them. And then we also, in this chapter, we provide a brief excerpt of, or a brief overview of the laws of the US here or over there in the US, specific laws that apply to students and their benefits and the things that they're legally they are able to receive those supports by law, right? So they're entitled to those services legally. And we had that, it's actually their appendices. So they're translated in Spanish, Arabic, Vietnamese, Chinese, and of course, English. And those are five languages that are, well, English, of course, the first language, but then the other 4 are the 4 languages that are spoken the most in K-12 schools by students when we found. So the top 4 languages spoken in K-12 schools. So, and of course, advocacy takes a village. So we had to recruit some colleagues and friends to help us with the translation, Dr. Roa Rashid and Ethan Trin. They're wonderful friends and colleagues of mine. They translated what we had in English to Arabic, Dr. Rashid, and then Ethan to Vietnamese. And then I had 2 of my students in my master's class in IGW. They translated my appendix from English to Chinese. And of course, I translated it to English. And it's there, writing is a form of advocacy. So we wanted this appendix specifically to be something that teachers can just print out and give it to parents. And parents know that their children are entitled to get services in their languages, that parents are also entitled to receive these services and support in their languages in schools. That we also talked about there in the appendix. We have information about homelessness. If students are homeless, what services can they get? All of these things that students might need. We shared that.
Let's double click on and zoom in on those 5 steps. Can you share what those 5 steps are?
So, and this is in the section of how to advocate. So the 5-step is to noticing. And this step is just to become aware of a problem. The second step is determining action. So when an issue is identified, when a problem is identified, then advocates need to first evaluate the many factors involved in their current situation, such, for example, institutional hierarchy, politics, stakeholders, and the advocate's own position in the organization. So advocacy is also, it's not you just saying something in favor of someone. You have to know where you are, your positioning, and how you can best support the population that you're trying to support. So you first need to know who you are and how you're situated in your organization. Step 3 is building alliances. After evaluating all the factors involved in the advocacy efforts, advocates must rally support. So again, it takes a community to become an advocate. And then step 4, gathering information. after establishing strong alliances in favor of your advocacy efforts, advocates must then thoroughly assess potential risks associated with taking strategic action. And then step 5, taking strategic action, equipped with co-advocates, knowledge and appropriate evidence, materials, support, the advocate is now ready to take strategic action for their students. And this is just kind of a brief overview of the 5 steps, but then we provide like step-by-step on the examples, the real life examples on how to advocate using those 5 steps.
Well, thank you for those very clear and systematic 5 steps that we can take. It's very similar to assessing students, like pre-assessing students and saying, okay, let's evaluate and let's take actions at the end after we evaluated what the students need. Yeah.
Absolutely, yes, yes.
Let's move to part 3 of your book, and you advocated for pre and in-service teachers to move from subject-centered pedagogy to student-centered pedagogy. Can you talk about that?
Absolutely. And thank you, Tan. You know, I love this section. When I was envisioning the book, the organization, part 3 in particular, I knew this section was going to be very unique because there is very little work when we think about SLIFE in general. There's very little research. It's a very emerging field right now. But then when we think about teacher preparation, how do we prepare teachers to support SLIFE and teacher education programs in particular? There is very, very little work being done right now. Yes, there are publications about how teachers can use strategies in the classroom, but how do you prepare teachers? There isn't a lot of conversation. So I knew that I needed to bring in the big names in the field. So we have Brenda Custodio, Judy O'Laughlin, we have Andrea Di Capo and Helene Marshall here. We have Dr. Montero from Canada and Stephanie Ledger. They're wonderful. I love their work. And then I was very grateful to recruit Michelle Marrero and Charlene Desir. And one of them is a teacher at Arlington Public Schools in Virginia, and the other one is a professor at Nova University in Florida. And they're just wonderful, wonderful, collaborators, writers, scholars, teachers. When they were writing their chapters, there were a lot of different major takeaways. Each chapter is kind of like their own unique, has its own unique personality, its own unique message. But the bigger takeaways, I think, from this section is that teachers need to recognize that our students are the ones who actually teach us, how to support them, especially SLIFE. We cannot, as educators, we cannot come with a preset mindset of what we're going to teach or how we're going to teach students. Students have to let us know what they need. Many times I did that, and that kind of actually created tensions because we're supposed to, as teachers, we're taught you're supposed to be prepared for class, but for SLIFE students, really what they get is what they need in that particular day. If they need to work on tracing, for example, and I'm talking about perhaps adolescents, you cannot start teaching to write sentences if they don't know how to hold a pen yet, or how to write their names. So you just really have to meet them where they are. And Brenda Custodio and Judy O'Laughlin did a wonderful job at talking about the very, very kind of an overview of the US and the very limited work being done about SLIFE preparation in teacher education programs. There's visibly nothing out there that requires teacher preparation programs to include SLIFE into their curriculum, which is something that needs to change. Also, Chapter 7, Drs. Di Capo and Marshall, they did a wonderful job about, they included an activity from one of their students, and he used music and dance. I love the arts, especially for SLIFE. It works very well in my experience. So they did a wonderful job in the chapter, very practitioner oriented, how to incorporate the program, which is MALP. It's a program that they both built to support SLIFE students. Then we have Chapter 8, Stephanie and Dr. Montero. They talked a little bit about the transformation journey of a teacher when, and it resonated with me many, many times when I was reading this. I was like nodding all the time. And I told them when I talked to them, and, this journey of going from subject-centered to student-centered, the fact that teachers, we really have to understand where we're coming from, who we are as teachers, because many times we just focus on ourselves in the sense that we just want to teach and teach and teach, and we have to get this information across. But SLIFE, they don't benefit that way. They benefit when you focus on them and their needs. And it's a beautiful chapter. And then chapter 9, we have Michelle and Charlene, and they just, this is a treasure chest chapter of activities, very practitioner, evidence-based, but very practitioner chapter. And it's actually one of the longest chapters in the whole book. But it's just a treasure chest of activities, approaches, strategies for SLIFE. It's everything that you need to know for supporting adolescents' life. So chapter 9, highly recommend all the chapters to everyone.
Well, that was a teaser right there. Can you tell us more about chapter 9 and just pull one of the activities out, or one of the examples of music or arts, that so that we can actually see this in action?
Absolutely. So Tan, since we're recording, do you want me to share something or?
It's up to you. Yeah,
or
sure.
Okay, so let me share with you. I can share a screenshot here. So just a brief, and again, this is not necessarily the final draft of the chapter, but this is an activity here that they shared with us, and is personify words using Instagram. And it just happened that, COVID-19, we had to switch to synchronous, asynchronous. And it was very interesting to see all of these activities. They have a lot of figures and pictures. And of course, they explain all the activities, but it's very interesting as a teacher to see the activities first being explained and then see the results in the figures. And it's just lovely. And she was talking about one of her students here, how they created kind of this Instagram in, and again, students with interrupted schooling, but they use a lot of visuals, which is very important. I do believe art is very, very important for to reach SLIFE in my experience. But yeah, this is kind of like a quick snapshot, but highly recommend, highly recommend.
It's great. It seems very relevant to students because it seems like a lot of students, Instagram is like their version of interacting with each other, right? And so even with our SLIFE, they are using Instagram and connecting with friends and families across borders. And so your this example shows that the teachers are using something that is relevant and connected to their lives, which is everything that Malp is talking about.
Absolutely. And that's also something very, very important to consider, is that when we're teaching SLIFE, we cannot just teach random content or information. The content that we teach them has to be contextualized, has to be in context, something that is happening, so they can see what they're learning in their real life. So the fact that they shared kind of like in the moment topics right there about the pandemic, learning about the pandemic, learning about COVID, Instagram, which is something that they use in their daily lives. That's something that is going to stay with their students. And I know it was effective for them because I read the chapter, but I know right away, without talking to them, I knew it was going to be successful for their students.
Let's move to talking about part 4, which is talking about building resilience with SLIFE.
Yes, in part 4, we have, it's about resilience. And also I wanted to include here in this particular section or part, chapters that talked about K through 12 in particular. So we have chapter 10, which is kind of like a general K through 12 perspective. Drs. Casanova and Alicia Alvarez, I was very grateful that they joined. They wrote about fostering the resilience and cultural wealth of students with limited or interrupted formal education. And they talked a little bit about cultural sustaining pedagogy and how to do it. One of my favorite chapters, I don't think I should say this, but it's one of my favorite, chapter 11, supporting queer SLIFE youth, initial queer considerations, written by Ethan Trin. And to this point, and this was actually one of the major points, salient points in the feedback that we've received from Springer, is that this is just cutting edge. You have not seen something like this before, and I was so thankful for Ethan, and they graciously accepted to write about something that has not been done before. You don't hear about queer SLIFE, It's just not in the field yet, but Ethan is leading that conversation. So I was so grateful. And then also we have chapter 12, Doctors Cruzado Guerrero and Martinez Alba. And Dr. Martinez Alba, she's a wonderful friend of mine and colleague, and we've worked on other projects. And I was so grateful that they agreed to write about using wordless books for literacy events for families and elementary school children's life. And then chapter 13, I knew right away when I was thinking about middle and high school, I knew that I wanted to recruit two of my colleagues. They were actually, we went together to our PhD program. We were in the same cohort, Drs. Aker and Daniel and me, and the three of us, we paused for a while because all of us, were busy with other projects, but we started writing during our dissertation period. We started writing about problem-based service learning, PBSL. And I told them we have to write a chapter about PBSL for SLIFE. And of course they agreed. Dr. Daniel, she's a teacher in middle school. I'm a teacher in I used to be a teacher in high school when I was writing this chapter. And Margie, Dr. Aker, she was teaching in community organizations. So it was just the best, most appropriate balance. Each of us wrote about middle, high school community organizations. It just worked perfectly. And it's a great, I really love this section as well. Great section, very, again, practice focused, especially chapters 12, 13. They're very practitioner oriented. We talked about, for example, how to use journaling and nature, for example, in problem-based service learning to support SLIFE. I can share with you another quick shot here. We have some pictures. And so in essence, chapter 13, we introduced strategic steps to problem-based service learning. So it's 7 steps, which is number 1, planning, learning about the background, preparing for service learning. Number 4 is implementing field experience and civic engagement. Number 5, reflecting and connecting. Number 6, diversifying and repeating. And number 7, expressing gratitude and evaluating. And we kind of incorporated those 7 steps in middle school, then in high school, then in community organizations. And let me share 2 pictures here with you, which I love. There are 2 pictures from Dr. Daniel in her example of middle school. And they did an indigenous garden in her middle school using problem-based service learning. And it was just, it's one of my favorite activities in the whole book. And they went through the 7-step process, identifying the problem, finding a solution, how is the solution going to be of service to the community, planning for the whole event and the whole, I'm telling you, and this is wonderful. This is a wonderful activity. And as you can see here, middle school students, they're learning, they're migrants, they're SLIFE, but they're doing their own journaling, they're taking notes, they're using all the skills that they have that necessarily doesn't have to be print literacy. It can be, like journaling, nature, or just using that background information that they might have about what are the best plants to use here, or how do we plant, or what do we need to plant. All of these things, Dr. Daniel talks about it in her activity, but I highly recommend this chapter as well. Of course, I'm biased, I wrote it, but highly recommend it. And really all the chapters, I love, like I said, chapter 11 as well. And I think Ethan has actually presented about this, or will be presenting. I pushed them to present. I told Ethan, you have to talk about this because this is something that you don't see in the publications, Queer's Life. And it's just wonderful. It's also heartbreaking to learn about Queer's life and the realities that they go through. But Ethan does a great job to offer some insights on what teachers can do. First, to recognize the different layers of vulnerability, right? They're vulnerable for different reasons and the different challenges that they have to go through beyond print literacy. But then Ethan does a good job about talking to teachers. Okay, this is what you need to recognize, and this is what you can do to support them. So
let's zoom in and double click and talk more about service learning. I feel like I I had Dr. Debbie Zakarian on, and she talked about how service learning is really important as well. And I feel like this is a recurring theme, especially for SLIFE. It's because Dr. Marshall and De Capua, they said that a lot of the SLIFE that come to our countries, they come from collectivist communities, and uh, they have contextualized learning experiences. Like, you go and you get water for the family. You go and you find certain routes for the family. But then all of a sudden we tell them to go sit and write an essay. I'm like, what is this essay for? Like, I don't. There's like such a connection. That's why we find a lot of SLIFE leaving school. Like, they're like, this is not practical at all. My parents need my help, and that's because they're from a collectivist society. So I feel like project-based learning, service learning is really an answer to make things more relevant for students. Why is that?
Absolutely. I think also, and not only First Life, I do believe this is a promise that Margie, Dr. Aker, Dr. Daniel, and I made to each other, and we have to go back and write a book about problem-based service learning, especially for migrant students. Uh, we'll get to it. So hopefully, in a few years, we'll be back here, Dan, to talk about it. But in my experience, I do feel that, especially problem-based service learning, this idea of finding a problem in your community and then finding a solution that benefits everyone. So it's not just about learning for the sake of learning. You're learning for the benefit of others, for yourself, of course, but then for the benefit of others. And I do think that's an opportunity for students to learn about moral values, to learn about, of course, problem solving skills, all of these things. But there's also an opportunity for them to see that their abilities, the skills that they have, finding solutions benefits people beyond them, benefits the community. So in my example, for example, here when I was in this particular chapter, I wrote about a project that we did. And initially, that project, I wanted us to go to, in Washington, D.C., of course, we have monuments and all of these things. So I wanted us to go on a field trip for English learners, newcomers, but as you know, budget is always a problem, an issue. So we couldn't go to field trips. And I wanted them to learn in contextualized settings. The White House, this is the White House, so they could learn about that. Or this is the Pentagon, or this or whatever, just different. But we just couldn't do it because of budgetary reasons. So what we did was that I made this a problem-based service learning activity where we're learning about different, and didn't have to be at that point about the DC area, but different monuments and landmarks about around the US. So what they did is that each of them created kind of like, let me show you here. They did a really wonderful job. So another preview here for the audience. So what we did was that we partnered with the school library, and then the school librarian, she was wonderful. She helped us because we had to go to the computers and look for information. So I gave them time in teams. They worked in teams, and they chose their landmark, the monument that they wanted to focus on. They looked for information online, and then they had to create these landmarks or monuments, and then present it in front of the class. And then uh, at the end of the project, when everything was completed, then we donated all of these landmarks and monuments to the school library. So all the students could see them. And then, as you can see here, all of them had information in the front so everybody could read about it. So that was kind of like the service element. And they were very proud because, the school recognized their efforts. The administration, the principal kind of gave them a shout out, thank you to the newcomers for donating their projects. And that was a big day for them. That was very exciting. So they could see, they're learning, they're doing this. They have, as you can see, they're very skillful. I mean, look at this White House. This is beautiful. So they have skills, they have abilities, but they're learning, they're doing this for somebody else, and they're being recognized for it. It was just wonderful. It was just wonderful. They really loved this project.
I mean, you could see the way they're lifted in the community, the way they're being perceived is now altered and changed because people say, "Oh, wow, they're actually doing something for the community." But also, I think as kids are learning about this, they'll never ask, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? And like we have an answer. We're doing this because we're going to bring the monuments into school because we don't have the budget to go out. So what can we do about that? And so it makes learning contextualized and relevant and purposeful.
Absolutely. And they were very motivated, let me tell you, very motivated.
Let's move to the last part. It's about adults' life. What can we do to support adults' life?
Adults Life, this was also another wonderful section to, and I was very grateful to recruit all the people that we have here. So for chapter 14, we had Nan. Chapter 15, we have three teachers from Israel. We have Sohar, Rachel, and Alon. In chapter 16, we have Andrea Lipka, and she does a lot of work with digital visual methods. I tell her that she's like the opposite of me. She's very techy and like just very intelligent with technology and visual methods, which I love. I just don't have the creativity to do it, and she's wonderful with that. Chapter 17, we have Martha Young Scholten, which is, she's a big name with adults Lesla or Adults Life, and then Egel is her co-author here. And then chapter 18, a wonderful friend and colleague, Dr. Kidwell, Tabitha Kidwell. She wrote about her experiences supporting different migrant women in the United States who had interrupted schooling from different countries. So in here there are different approaches here and different information. Everybody has kind of like their own message. But what I can tell you in general message here is that adults need to learn with a purpose. So like chapter 18, for example, which is Tabitha Kidwood's chapter, is the last chapter of the book. Her quote in the title says it all. We should learn English to solve our problems. So adults want to learn the language, English, to be able to solve their problems. The goal here is not to know how to conjugate verbs just to learn how to conjugate verbs. No, they're learning language in a way that they can use it in real life situations. And then Tabitha, for example, in her chapter, she talks about how in her, it was a community program that they had, a community class, and they really enjoy, the students, they really enjoy one of the classes where they went to the store, a very local store, small, but then they went there and they practiced, how to say, hi, how are you? I would like to buy this. How much is this? Things that they need to use every day. That's the vocabulary that you need to develop every day. Or can I have a bag? Or, do you have more of this kind of like daily use vocabulary? That those are the things that you need. And they were very happy with that. So there's different things. Andrea, for example, Lipka, chapter 16, she talks about how to use digital visual methods, and she talks about murals and pictures to support students. And I really love this chapter because I love arts again, first life, but I don't know much of how to do it. So this is a great chapter to learn a little bit about how to incorporate visual methods into SLIFE classrooms. And last but not least, chapter 15 also was one of my favorite ones. Really, they're all my favorites, but this one has a special message here because they talk about explicit instruction. And this is something that Tan, we have, especially in the field right now, we tend to promote more like student-centered instruction and things like that. But in this particular chapter 15, Sohar, Rachel, and Alon, they really do a wonderful job making a case for explicit instruction. The fact that it's explicit instruction can be seen as teacher-focused, but they make a case to why it works in their context in Israel for the immigrant population that they teach. And they talked about, for example, when initially when they had student-centered classrooms, students didn't know what to do because they also come from cultures that have traditional school systems. So it has to be a gradual process of release. If you just in the classroom and you tell them, okay, do this activity, but they don't, first, they're learning print literacy, and second, they don't know what student-centered environments are. So they're confused because they don't know the language, they're learning how to read and write, and then they don't know what student-centered instruction is. So it's not gonna work for them. And they really make a case to how explicit instruction works, and also the considerations for explicit instruction for teachers, because when you're teaching more explicitly, there are abilities or skills that teachers need to have to be able to explain the content more explicitly, then you wouldn't need to develop, for example, if you're doing student-centered teaching. So it's a great chapter also. So I recommend all of them.
Well, I recommend this book. And as you were talking extensively about the chapters, I thought, oh my goodness, I'm so happy that your first plan for your dissertation was not approved, because we were waiting for this book. We're waiting for you to write it, and this is the fruit of your dissertation. So thank you for coming on to talk to us about your book and writing it.
Thank you so much, Stan, for those kind words. This was really a labor of love. It's been, I mean, we're now in 2022, but we started this book in 2018. Just the idea, conceptualizing the idea, and then we spent 2019 writing it, and then 2021 going through the review. It's been a process. It's been a few years in the making, but we're all so proud of this work, and just if this book helps a little bit, just a little bit, the field to push forward in what we know about SLIFE, then I think, I'm happy. So that's what I really hope, above all, that this book helps teachers, practitioners, and that it continues to kind of guide the direction where we're heading towards supporting SLIFE.
Well, you've brought all the top experts in the field of SLIFE and also teachers who are practicing and then applying the strategies and the suggestions from the researchers. So.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Yes. And we have people here. I don't know if I mentioned this, but in addition to having, of course, international scholars here, individuals who might be now in the US, but they come from different perspectives as well. But we do have scholars who are situated right now in Canada. We have scholars who are situated in Israel, Italy, UK, and of course the United States. So my hope is to continue this and expand that even more and include more countries in the future.
Right. Quite international.
Yes.
Let's end with this. It's called traffic light teaching. It's a red light is something that you would ask teachers to stop doing in terms of SLIFE. A yellow light is something that you would want them to start doing. And then a green light is something you would ask them to keep doing. So stop, start, keep doing.
Well, the red light, the stop doing, is, and this goes back to something that I mentioned earlier, to not to avoid approaching SLIFE with a preconceived mindset of what they need or who they are. Talk to SLIFE, learn about them, learn about their languages, learn about their situations, because also when we think about interrupted schooling, usually it doesn't happen just because it happens. There are reasons behind it. So there might be some trauma attached to it. There might be some difficulties. So it's not just interrupted schooling. There is more there that students need to unpack to be able to successfully integrate into the new school system. Because it's really more about than just learning print literacy. It's becoming part of the school system, doing schooling, as Dr. Zicapo and Marshall call it. Doing schooling is new for them. They don't know how to do schooling. So please approach, this is a green light, approach students with an open mind, especially SLIFE students. And the yellow one, I went kind of like red, green, and then yellow. But the yellow one to continue doing is to continue thinking of students, as human beings, who are more than just individuals who are kind of just absorbing content, but who are human beings. They're dealing with struggles, as we know. And hopefully you can look at the conversation with Hilda of social emotional learning and keep doing that work of social emotional support for students.
Well, this has been a great conversation of helping us think. It was almost like having all the experts in one place. And that's what you did. And so you were a wonderful host at a table where we were taking so much from the conversation. So, Dr. Luis Javier Pentón Herrera, muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Tan. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here with you. Thank you for your kind words. And thank you for the opportunity to talk about my book here. I hope it's a good contribution to the field.
It definitely is.